Welcome to Pod Save America. I'm John Favreau.
I'm Dan Pfeiffer.
Later on the pod, Dan's interview with Democratic digital strategist and the co-founder of Acronym, Tara McGowan. Before that, we'll talk about the escalating impeachment probe and Michael Bloomberg's entry into the presidential race. A few other pods you'll want to check out this week from us. The second episode of Tommy's special Pod Save America on the Ground in Iowa series drops tomorrow. On Tuesday, Tommy takes us inside a caucus and lets us know exactly how it works. It's a great episode. There's also a very funny episode of Love It or Leave It from over the weekend you should check out. And in case you missed it, check out last Thursday's epic episode of Hysteria featuring Gloria Steinem, who was here at Crooked Media headquarters. Highly, highly recommend the conversation. Check it out. Finally, Stacey Abrams needs our help. We're trying to raise another $1 million for Fair Fight 2020 to help protect the vote, which Fair Fight has already done in Louisiana and Kentucky, where Democrats just won. It is incredibly important to help them be on the ground now in advance of 2020. So please go to votesaveamerica.com/fairfight to help us crush our new goal. And of course, if you pre-order Dan's new book on Trumping America, you will be able to help Fair Fight through buying the book as well.
John, I didn't even put book promo in the outline. You did it for me.
You know,
I really appreciate that.
I just did it off the cuff. It just came to me. It was inspiration.
You just made it into the Pfeiffer family Thanksgiving dinner, what I'm thankful for. So congratulations.
Fantastic. All right, Dan. The impeachment hearings are over for now, but new evidence and new co-conspirators just keep coming out of the woodwork, potentially including the top Republican on the committee that's been running the impeachment inquiry. That's right. Devin Nunes might have been part of the same election rigging scheme that he's supposed to be investigating as part of the Intel Committee. Over the last 2 years, reports say that Nunes has been conspiring with corrupt Ukrainian officials to take down Joe Biden. He met with them in Vienna in 2018, and his staffers scrapped a 2019 trip when they found out that they'd have to notify Adam Schiff, and instead met via Skype. And how do we know all this, Dan? Where are these reports coming from?
The internet?
More than the internet, Dan. It's coming from Lev Parnas, the indicted mobster who says that Trump pulled him aside at the White House Hanukkah party and gave him a James Bond-style mission to get dirt on Biden in Ukraine. And now his lawyer is telling reporters this is what he wants to testify. And by the way, he doesn't just want to testify, he has records about all of this. So what was your reaction to this story about Devin Nunes' involvement, and how big of a deal do you think this is?
I mean, even by the standards of Devin Nunes's, let me try again. Even by the standard of Devin Nunes's incredible corrupt stupidity, this is pretty mind-blowing. Is he sat there for days pretending as if this was all some sort of hoax, and he was in on the crime to begin with, reportedly in on the crime. We can talk about whether we believe this or not, but it is certainly very credible given how Nunes and his staff have behaved since the day Trump was elected. We remember him heading over to the White House to tip people off about the Russia investigation, hiding in bushes. When that was discovered, his staffer, Kash Patel, who came up in the Fiona Hill hearings as someone who was involved in Ukraine policy in ways in which they probably shouldn't have been. So it is certainly credible, I guess, given what we've seen from Nunes and his staff thus far.
Yeah, and look, it explains a few things. One, why Devin Nunes looked so bent out of shape earlier in the week when Eric Swalwell asked for a previously reported Daily Beast story about how Parnas helped arrange calls in Europe for Nunes to be read into the record. So explains that. And then Devin Nunes, of course, is asked about this by Maria Bartiromo, another big Trump supporter, posing as a journalist over the weekend. And Devin Nunes doesn't deny it. He doesn't deny it. He basically just says he is planning to sue CNN and the Daily Beast, which is how he rolls now when someone talks about him or reports things that Lev Parnas' lawyer said.
but he said he couldn't discuss it because it involved criminal activity, which seems to be a little bit of a tell, if you will.
Well, in his mind, the criminal activity is on behalf of the news organizations who, again, reported what this guy's lawyer is saying. Now, I mean, the question you raised is should we trust Lev Parnas? He is an indicted Russian mobster, and what do you think?
I think we have to take it with a grain of salt, but it is credible. It fits with a pattern and helps explain Nunes' very specific reaction when Eric Swalwell brought this up. It does honestly speak to the immense stupidity of Nunes, that if this were true, that he would sit on the committee this whole time and just leave himself open to this. He could have easily recused himself, which is probably what everyone in the Republican Party would have wished, since he was kind of sort of layered by Jim Jordan to begin with. So I don't think we should assume this is 100% true, but I think it at least fits with a pattern of behavior.
Yeah, and look, the other thing we know is ABC News reported on Sunday that the House Intelligence Committee is already in possession of videos, photos, and audio recordings handed over by Parnas that include Giuliani and Trump. We, of course, don't know if Devon Nunes is part of that as well, but it certainly seems at this stage that the whole Parnas affair is much more of a Michael Cohen style thing than something else, because as we know, Michael Cohen said he was going to flip on Trump, and everyone's like, well, who knows if he's telling the truth or not? He's a liar. And then, of course, Michael Cohen had all the receipts. It does seem like if Parnas is turning over evidence anyway, it wouldn't really make sense for him to lie about this stuff. And here's the other thing you need to know. Of course, from Devin Nunes' perspective, right, the source of all of these conspiracy theories is the same, right? And so, John Solomon, pretend reporter that used to write for The Hill, and a bunch of right-wing conspiracy theorists, right? How long have they been pushing this bullshit narrative that somehow Joe Biden did something corrupt in Ukraine? And so it would totally make sense for not only Donald Trump and Rudy Giuliani, but the other crazy right-wing Trumpist assholes in Congress, like Devin Nunes, to completely buy into this. And Devin Nunes thinking to himself, yeah, well, in 2018, Joe Biden's going to run for president, and I'm going to get to the bottom of this conspiracy theory that I've heard from John Solomon that, he had some corrupt activity in Ukraine, so I might as well send some of my fucking staffers over there and go meet with the fired corrupt prosecutor myself in hopes that I can get some dirt. I mean
the odds that Devin Nunes took a selfie with the fired prosecutor under a "Welcome to Vienna" sign with the hashtag Biden time is at least 50%.
The other thing we know is, Adam Smith, who is the House chair, top Democrat on the Armed Services Committee, was interviewed over the weekend, and he said Devin Nunes will likely face an ethics investigation over this news. That would be Devin Nunes' second ethics investigation in just a couple years. The first, he was ultimately cleared of leaking classified information during the Mueller hearing. So that's great. We should also mention that documents released late on Friday by the State Department show that Secretary of State Mike Pompeo got on the phone with Rudy Giuliani at least twice in March to talk about the smear campaign against former Ambassador Marie Yovanovitch. And Pompeo asked Rudy to send over a packet of his nutty conspiracy theories, which Rudy did in an envelope that with the Trump markings on it. Dan, how significant is Pompeo's role here?
Well, it's not surprising. I mean, of course, Mike Pompeo, who is the ultimate political hack, Trump ass kisser, of course he would be involved. There's no way he would have too much FOMO to not be involved. So he's definitely there. I mean, so let's just yes, it says so much that it's not a surprise, right? It's not a surprise that he's involved, not a surprise that he has lied about it. Remember when he went on the Sunday show right after the reports about the whistleblower came out, and he basically pretended to have no knowledge of any sort of conversation with the Ukrainians, only to then find out days later that he was on the call?
Yeah.
I mean, it just it sort of speaks to our lowered expectations. But if you just sort of do the roll call of criminality here, so involved in this criminal conspiracy in some way, shape, or form, either the crime itself or the cover-up, you have the Attorney General, the President, the Vice President, the Secretary of State, the Director of National Intelligence, the White House Chief of Staff, and the White House and the President's personal attorney all have somehow been involved in this, and now possibly also the top-ranking Republican on the House Intelligence Committee. It is the easier question to answer is who wasn't involved in Washington.
Yeah, when Trump megadonor turned Ambassador Gordon Sondland testified that, quote, everyone was in the loop, he wasn't kidding. I mean, we're not, again, we're not making this shit up. Gordon Sondland testified that all of these people, minus Nunes, although who knows what he knows, but certainly Pompeo, were in the loop. And, and Fiona Hill basically the next day sort of backs up Sondland, and she's like, well, I hadn't realized it at the time, but yes, there were some of us who were doing foreign policy and national security or thought we were doing that. But then there was another group of people who include apparently most people in the upper echelons of the government who were doing a domestic political errand, as she said, for Donald Trump. And it seems like Mike Pompeo was part of that. Meanwhile, we got Rudy Giuliani, who's been out there on television saying that he has some kind of insurance policy, in his words, that will stop Trump from throwing him under the bus. On Saturday, he sought to clarify this on Twitter. Here's his tweet, all caps, truth alert. That's how you know something good's coming. The statement I've made several times of having an insurance policy, if thrown under the bus, is sarcastic and relates to the files in my safe about the Biden family's 4-decade monetizing of his office. If I disappear, it will appear immediately along with my RICO chart. What the fuck is he talking about? Rudy Giuliani, America's mayor, ran for president. This is what he has been reduced to. If I disappear, magical files will be released.
But they're the files that Trump and Barr want to come out.
Right.
To actually exist.
I know.
He's going to end up in a black site on a barge off of Poland, like where people are demanding the RICO chart. Like it's so stupid and sad, and his like.
Something's wrong.
I don't know. I don't know. It's sad. Sad's not the right word. It is. It's sort of infuriating that this person has apparently a large amount of influence in American politics.
A huge amount, and not apparently, based on the testimony of every Trump administration official who has gone before Congress. Rudy Giuliani was directing our fucking Ukraine policy. And here he is not making less sense than even Donald Trump in a tweet. I mean, this man is seriously unwell. Not well.
Did you read Olivia Nuzzie's story this morning about
I didn't have time.
With Giuliani? It is so funny. It apparently in addition to butt dialing reporters and leaving crimes on voicemails, he's very big into using the reactions on the iPhone, like the like and the thumbs up, the thumbs up and the exclamation point. And he will often go back 37 texts and like some of his own statements. And he sometimes will send to reporters just things that aren't for them at all. Like he sent one reporter a picture of him on a boat smoking a cigar or something like that. And then he quoted some White House reporter saying, the best time to get Rudy is 8 or 9 when he's, quote, a little loosened up, but not yet unhinged.
Oh my God. That's the sweet spot, huh?
Yeah. Just a couple of drinks in.
I mean, we should note the import of this is that Rudy Giuliani is currently under federal investigation, and there could be a situation where he is indicted or charged with something, and then the question is, what will he say about Donald Trump? Do you think Rudy goes down for Trump? I don't know.
Why do you think Trump and the Republicans haven't thrown Rudy under the bus?
I think because they are.
I mean, other than because of the insurance.
No, obviously the insurance policy he's talking about is fucking nonsense. But I do think that the reason that Trump hasn't, Trump is doing something very unusual, which is he's not throwing Rudy under the bus, but he's also not talking about him anymore or defending him. And in that middle ground, what that tells me is Trump knows full well that Rudy knows everything. and could be very damaging to him, and doesn't want to piss him off, but also doesn't want to have a ton of association with him anymore because he is under federal investigation and could very well be in big trouble. That's my thought. What do you think?
I think that is certainly part of it. Like, Trump has been crime adjacent most of his adult life and has managed to stay out of prison. So he's more thoughtful about how not to go to jail than he is on almost any other issue. But I also think this is a little bit of the trap of the perfect call defense, which is because Trump can never admit doing anything wrong, even slightly wrong, he's forced to stick by Rudy and Mulvaney. Right, two people who could easily throw under the bus and blame for this. And the most in any other normal seems so fucking quaint, but any normal political situation, there would be a fall person, right? It would be, we would decide, Republicans would go to Trump and they would say, the best way to protect you is to get rid of Rudy. Like, someone has to take the fall because we need to be able to blame someone other than you. So we're going to blame Rudy for being overly enthusiastic in his service of you and crossing some lines. And we're going to blame Mulvaney for allowing the security aid to be held up and creating this problem. And Mulvaney's going to go, and we're going to shit on Rudy, and he's going to be persona non grata for a while. But Trump can't allow that to happen because he can't admit that anything went wrong. And so he has put himself in this very strange position.
Yeah, strange is one word for it. Let's talk about the evolving Republican response to impeachment, beginning with the target of the investigation, Donald Trump. On Friday, he wanted us all to know just how little he cares about impeachment by calling his spokespeople at Fox and Friends and ranting for 53 minutes straight. No commercials. Here is a clip.
They have the server, right, from the DNC, Democratic National Committee.
Who has the server?
Now, the FBI went in and they told him, get out of here. You're not kidding. We're not giving it to you. They gave the server to CrowdStrike, or whatever it's called, which is a company owned by a very wealthy Ukrainian. And I still want to see that server. You know, the FBI has never gotten that server. That's a big part of this whole thing. Why did they give it to a Ukrainian company?
Are you sure they did that? Are you sure they gave it to Ukraine?
Well, that's what the word is, and that's what I asked actually in my phone call, if you know.
Right.
I mean, I asked it very point blank because we're looking for corruption.
That's what the word is. That's what the word is. Fucking nonsense. Nonsense. Every word of that was complete nonsense. And you can tell because even Fox and Friends was he has stumped Steve Doocy. he has made Steve Doocy question him.
I mean, I'm sure Trump's going to call into Fox and Friends 1,000 more times before the election, and I hope he does. But the next time, I'm positive the producers of Fox and Friends will not just spend the whole time on a reaction shot as Ducey and Kilmeade and the other person, Ashley Earnhardt, I guess, is that her name? Look just like they're trying so hard not to look horrified and like keep a straight face, but they can't because they know they're facilitating just absolute stupidity. I mean, it's a truly mind-boggling thing. It is worth noting that a server is not a thing. It is 2019. Meet the cloud.
I mean, that is the craziest part of all of this. The man thinks, we talked about this before, but it is not said nearly enough. It is not printed nearly enough in the stories about this. The man thinks that a physical server is lost somewhere in Ukraine. And he doesn't realize that when the FBI checked this out, they were checking fucking cloud compute. The emails are in the cloud. There is no physical server. The president may be impeached over extorting the Ukrainian government to look into a conspiracy about a server that does not exist. He is the president of the United States.
Also, another important point, CrowdStrike, not a Ukrainian company.
Nope.
An American company. Based in Sunnyvale, California.
Guy that owns it, Russian-born. Just nothing to do with the Ukrainians at all. No server, not in Ukraine, not owned by Ukrainians. FBI already checked it out. Check, 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 check. Donald Trump still believes this. Republican members of Congress still believe this, like fucking Devin Nunes, Senator John Kennedy, who started spouting this bullshit on TV. I mean, it's fun to mock this, but why is this CrowdStrike conspiracy like really problematic?
I mean, other than the complete blithering idiocy of the president and his political party, as the New York Times reported over the weekend, this conspiracy theory is part of a Russian intelligence operation to try to avoid blame for the 2016 election interference. That's exactly what they're doing. And, they just must wake up every day and be like, I cannot believe these people believe it. Like, when they started this, like a lot of things, it's about just creating doubt on the fringes of the internet. And here you have the President of the United States calling into a national television program, just echoing it. You have all of the Republicans in a nationally televised congressional hearing echoing it, even though all of the intelligence agencies of the government of said president, run by appointees of said party, have said that it is not true, and they still do it. It is just mind-bogglingly stupid and dangerously so.
Yeah, I mean, there's also an interesting line from the New York Times story. Said the Russian intelligence officers conveyed the information about this conspiracy to prominent Russians and Ukrainians, who then used a range of intermediaries like oligarchs, businessmen, and their associates to pass the material to American political figures and even some journalists who were likely unaware of its origin, the officials said. Interesting that the New York Times wrote about this, since one of the journalists who did write about this conspiracy theory now works for the New York Times, Ken Vogel. At the time, he was at Politico and wrote the famous Politico story about the Ukrainian involvement in the 2016 election, which has since been debunked but has been read by just about every Republican defender of Donald Trump during this impeachment process. So I thought that was interesting.
Well, John, as you know, Ken Vogel can do no wrong, because Ken Vogel told us that.
I mean, props to the New York Times for, even in a very oblique way, admitting that one of the people who currently works for their news organization got snowed by a Russian intelligence operation. I mean, this is what the sad part here, and the scary part is, this is what the Russians, this is, as you said, this is what the Russians could only dream about, right? That this Ukrainian conspiracy theory, all they want, they don't expect that everyone in the United States will suddenly believe this. They want to just sow just enough doubt and make this a partisan divisive issue so that eventually Democrats and, the intelligence community and the media and everyone else believe the truth, which is the Russians were involved in the election. But one major political party and an entire conservative media infrastructure and the President of the United States all believe now something different. Or at the very least, they think that the Ukrainians were involved in addition to the Russians. You have some Republicans saying that, well, I believe that the Russians were part of this, but, maybe the Ukrainians were part of this too. Who knows? All a Russian intelligence operation. That's what they're all falling for right now.
I mean, there's a term to describe this, which is called useful idiots, which is how you describe people who become part of an intelligence operation without knowing they're a part of it. And that is the entire Republican Party right now.
Yeah.
They are, this is not to delve into, sort of Russia conspiracy thing. This is a very simple fact that that the Republicans are saying something that is known not to be true, and it is the thing the Russians want them to be saying.
That's right. That's exactly right. So in addition to just defending Donald Trump, Republicans have also started to launch a counterattack over the last several days. On that Fox and Friends call, Trump got very excited about an FBI Inspector General report he said will be historic when it's released in early December. The Inspector General at the FBI, who is independent, was looking into whether law enforcement officials abused their power when they asked courts to allow surveillance of Trump campaign official Carter Page. According to the Washington Post, the report will say that the FBI did not abuse its power, that the surveillance was warranted, but that a low-level FBI employee who no longer works there may have altered an email that was part of the surveillance application. Now, the Post story says even without that altered email, the surveillance should have been approved anyway, and so it shouldn't have substantively changed the decision by the courts. But, how big of a deal will the Republicans make of this?
So they will make a huge deal. And I suspect that not all, but a decent portion of the media will follow along, because this just now automatically lends itself to a he said story. Right? Both sides, quote unquote, if you want to do both sides journalism, it's very easy here, because it's the fundamental fact is everything the Republicans have been saying is wrong. There was no quote-unquote coup. There was no attempt to overthrow a presidency. There was no criminality involved. There was no conspiracy. There was nothing. There was a counterintelligence operation that was signed off on by federal judges because there was probable cause to do that.
Yeah.
And then there was a low-level bureaucrat who altered an email, and those two things will be treated as of equal importance, and that is unfortunate and alarming.
When they shouldn't, because if the reports about the report are true, the report will actually blow a hole through multiple conspiracy theories that Republicans have been pushing for quite a while now. They keep saying that, like, that the Democrats funded this dirty dossier from Christopher Steele, and that's why there was an investigation into Donald Trump and his campaign. And the Washington Post says this report will say, no, absolutely not. This investigation was not started because of the dossier. These application for surveillance did not get approved because of any information in the dossier, and that while the dossier existed and maybe some of the information in the dossier wasn't correct, none of the investigation into Donald Trump's campaign happened because of Christopher Steele or this fucking dossier. And that is basically the foundation of the Republican conspiracy that the Russia investigation was a hoax. That was the foundation of that, and this report could completely blow a hole in that.
Well, it's like the original, I think the Post broke this story, I believe, on Friday, or time has basically been a flat circle since we started group threading at the crack house of dawn, but I think it was Friday. And the story led with the FBI attorney, if I remember this correctly, with the FBI attorney altering the document. And I sort of understand from a journalistic perspective why that's the case, because that, like, a FBI employee doing something wrong and getting fired for it is quote unquote news. But the context of this is so important, because the actual news is the primary talking point of the president of the Republican Party over 3 years has been undermined by the inspector general appointed by his attorney general. Right. Like, that should be the end of that. But because, context is often more important than what is quote unquote new. But because what was new here is going to sort of muddy up the very important context that this report provides.
Yeah, I mean, which is what they do for everything. I mean, Trump is on record saying this inspector general is everyone should respect his work. He does amazing work. Well, if he blows a hole in the conspiracy theory, I don't know if he'll be saying that. Although, like you said, he'll cherry pick whatever he wants and just lie about it, because that's what they do now.
I mean, it's like Kevin McCarthy, who on the day after Sondland testified in front of the nation that there was a quid pro quo, Kevin McCarthy went out and said, "I enjoyed the testimony. There was no quid pro quo." It's like, if you can, I hate the term gaslighting, but that's what's happening here. Yeah,
I mean, they're not even trying anymore to come up with lies that are believable in any way. That's where we're at. Can
I ask you another question here?
Sure.
Just as we talk about sort of Nunes and Pompeo.
Mm-hmm.
Have you noticed that the people, there was an element of being in public life where if someone had allegations about you or your office or your boss, you had to respond to questions about it in some way, shape, or form?
Yeah.
And the Republicans now just don't respond. There is no comment from Nunes' staff about this. Either a reporter would call and say, "Is this true? Yes or no?" And you would have to say something, right?
Yep.
And in that answer, you could divine, the reader and the reporter could sort of divine where it's going, right? Did they confirm or deny it? Did they outright deny it? Did they try to provide some sort of context But now, and this has been, I think, really something that's changed since Trump's come on the scene, is the Republicans just don't respond to the reporters they don't want to respond to.
No, because they have decided to delegitimize the nonpartisan media, and the only legitimate media is Fox and other right-wing outlets. And so, because they've delegitimized the rest of the media and said that it's biased and fake and out to get them, just like Trump has said for the last couple of years, they don't believe they have any kind of obligation to answer reporters' questions. And in the rare moments that they are on television answering questions from nonpartisan media, like, I don't usually watch the Sunday shows, but I have for the last couple of weeks just to keep up with an impeachment. And mostly they can just run circles around the hosts, even when the hosts are trying their best. Like I on Face the Nation this Sunday, Kellyanne Conway gets on there with Margaret Brennan and just lies for 10 minutes straight. Nothing that she says resembles the truth at all. And because Brennan's trying to get through all of her questions, she doesn't stop and correct everything. And so these people figure, well, I got 5 minutes on television. They're going to have to cut away after that. So I can just keep lying and lying and lying and lying. And then that's it. And then I'm done. And then there's no consequence for that.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, so obviously some like Jake Tapper do pretty well in those scenarios, but it is also the hosts are in an impossible position because
that's right.
What do you do, right?
You have to be willing to get into a very uncomfortable exchange that Republicans will then use to point out that you're some kind of a partisan hack, right? Like or you have to decide I'm going to ask this person about one thing, and when they lie, I'm going to just keep going and going and going on that one topic and that one lie and try to call them out for that and get rid of the rest of the questions that I was going to ask. I mean, so you have to make that decision, and I almost think that would be more useful, but I think maybe the most useful thing would be to not book congenital liars on your shows anymore. It's one option.
Yeah. I just think the opting out of mainstream media as a political strategy is not something that's being talked about enough. And it doesn't feel like, maybe these are conversations that are happening among reporters, but it's not showing up. Like, it's just treated as if they weren't there to take the call, as opposed to a deliberate strategy not to answer any of the questions over a 3-year period.
Yeah, it's pretty bad. Well, they know that the public believes that the media is incredibly biased, that distrust of the media is at an all-time high, so they don't think that there is any downside to doing this. It's just like the White House deciding to cancel the briefing and never, we have a press secretary who's never done a White House briefing right now because they just don't, there's no punishment for it. It's bad. It's not great, Dan.
I know, it's not.
The second part of the Republican counterattack on impeachment is being led by Judiciary Chairman Lindsey Graham, who announced on Thursday that he'd be launching an investigation of his own into the Biden family. And to give you more context around Lindsey Graham's history with Joe Biden, here's a clip from an interview he did with Scott Conroy during his presidential campaign in 2016.
If you can't admire Joe Biden as a person, then it's probably you got a problem. You need to do some self-evaluation, because what's not to like? I called him after Bo died, and he basically said, well, Bo was my soul. We've talked for a long time. He came to my ceremony and said some of the most incredibly heartfelt things that anybody could ever say to me. And he's the nicest person I think I've ever met in politics. He is as good a man as God ever created.
I mean, what does this say about Lindsey Graham?
I mean, that he's just a horrendous human being.
Yeah. Look, I mean,
how can one person say those things with what was seemingly true emotion a few years ago and be acting this way in this moment?
I just want everyone to understand, it is not as if Lindsey Graham had this relationship with Joe Biden, and suddenly Joe Biden, there's a possibility that he was engaged in some kind of wrongdoing, and his family as well. And you think, well, I have a good personal relationship with him, but this thing came up and I have to do my job as a public official, and this sucks, but that's the way it is. That's not what we're dealing with here. What Joe Biden is being accused of, which is pressuring for the firing of a corrupt Ukrainian prosecutor. And this is part of the problems with how the press has handled this, because they keep saying there's no evidence for this, there's no evidence for this. It's not that there's no evidence for this. It's that every single, from Barack Obama down through his entire administration, through the global community, through every Trump administration official who has testified before Congress to a person, every single one of them has said that not only did Joe Biden do nothing wrong, Joe Biden did the right thing by pressuring for the firing of a corrupt Ukrainian prosecutor. He was correct. The guy was corrupt. That's why the Obama administration wanted him fired. That's why 3 Republican senators in 2016 signed a letter in favor of what Joe Biden was doing in Ukraine. Republicans. And when he did it, it was public. Everyone knew at the time. Every Republican in Congress knew that Joe Biden had pressured that, had put pressure to fire that prosecutor, Shokin. Everyone knew it was happening, and at the time, everyone knew that Hunter Biden was on the board of Burisma. It was public information, and no one said a fucking word until Rudy and Trump tried to go dig up this dirt in Ukraine and force an investigation into Biden. Everyone knew he did the right thing, and Lindsey Graham knew it too. And with that knowledge that this is all bullshit, Lindsey Graham is now opening investigation into the Biden family, his good family friends, to tarnish him. That's what's happening.
I mean, the entire Biden conspiracy theory reminds me a lot of the Obama birther conspiracy, because it is something that starts on the far reaches of the internet, gets picked up by Trump and the Republican Party, and sort of the strictures of journalism may allow it to fester a bit, because you're right. It is good for the reporters for saying there is no evidence to support it every time it comes up.
Yeah.
And the nonpartisan media has done a very good job of that. But you're right. It is not only is there no evidence to support it, all of the evidence proves it false.
Right.
It's sort of the same thing with, Donald Trump or Rush Limbaugh or Jerome Corsi or some other yahoo says Barack Obama was born in Kenya, and you say, well, there's no evidence to support that. Well, no, actually, there's a giant piece of evidence, including his fucking birth certificate, that says he was born in Hawaii. And so you actually I do think it's important to go one step further, because no evidence suggests, well, they haven't proven it yet, right? As opposed to the fact that all of the evidence to be accumulated, which is quite substantial, proves the opposite.
Well, and part of this is conflated with a bunch of people in the media and on the left saying, well, it certainly was shady for Hunter Biden to get this position on a board for doing nothing and getting paid all this money. And it's like, that, fine. That has absolutely nothing to do with the allegations here, which is that, yes, Hunter Biden was on the board, but then Joe Biden took an action that somehow decreased the chances that his son's company or the company that his son sat on would be investigated, when in fact, all of the evidence suggests that when that prosecutor was fired, it increased the chances that Burisma would be investigated. Increased the chances. And I don't know if everyone has made this point enough. I don't know if the Biden campaign has made it enough, though I see they're on Twitter all the time talking about it. I've seen Joe Biden say we did nothing wrong. I don't think it's possible for it to be made too many times, because it continues to get lost in all of this.
Yeah, we have to disentangle two things: whether Hunter Biden was qualified to be on that board, in the intentions of Burisma in putting him on that board, and separate that from whether the access that he was theoretically being paid for gave him anything. And the evidence is very strongly it did not, since his father made a very public push that put his son, the company on which the company on whose board his son sat, in greater legal jeopardy.
And in case you didn't get that this was all a big game that Lindsey Graham is playing, here's his response today when he was confronted with, well, you've said all these wonderful things about Joe Biden in the past. What are you doing? And he said, quote, "I like Joe Biden. All I can say is that Joe didn't pull any punches when he ran against McCain. That's the way the system works. We're not going to live in a country where just one party gets investigated." Well, I just thought was a stunning statement that has not gotten enough attention today, that Lindsey Graham basically just admitted, oh, yeah, this is politics. We're just doing this to try to smear Joe Biden as he tries to run for president because, look, it was a tough campaign in 2008, too, against John McCain. And so, if you use the power of the federal government to smear a political opponent, that's just the way things work. That's basically what Lindsey Graham has admitted.
And yes, there were arguments, disputes, negative ads on both sides in the Obama, Biden, McCain, Palin campaign. Yes. There was no criminal conspiracy. There was no use of taxpayer dollars to smear anyone. In fact, when a question was raised by some about whether John McCain was eligible for the presidency because he was born in Panama, not on the actual U.S. soil, President Obama and Joe Biden supported the notion that he was eligible for the presidency and helped pass a bill to ensure that to be the case.
Yeah, right.
So let's not pretend. Let's not have, like, it wasn't all hope and change in 2008. There were fights, but let's not pretend these are two of the same things, because they are fucking not.
Well, again, and this is what the Republicans are counting on, right? Is that voters believe and people believe that politics is rough and tumble, and unfortunately, a lot of people believe politics is corrupt anyway, and they think it's all a game where everyone tries to smear each other, and they're hoping that they conflate traditional rules of engagement where you run negative ads and say all kinds of bad things, which happens in campaigns all the time, and people can complain about whether it's bad or not. They're trying to conflate that with using the power of the federal government, using the powers of your official office to get personal favors and to do political bidding, as opposed to the public interest, which is what's at core of this entire impeachment inquiry right now. And what's scary about what Lindsey Graham is doing is it's not just Donald Trump anymore. It's not just Donald Trump anymore. Now it's Lindsey Graham, it's Devin Nunes. I mean, we are having this whole fucking discussion in the media about, well, can Democrats convince any Republicans to vote with them on impeaching Donald Trump? How do we convince the Republicans? We can't convince the fucking Republicans because some of them are in on the conspiracy. What are you talking about? Oh, we're gonna convince them to vote for Bishop. They're fucking accomplices right now. They're co-conspirators. We're not gonna convince them of anything.
Well, it's very important. We did convince one of them, and they kicked him out of the party. It's an unanswerable question of anytime anyone agrees with the Democrats on impeachment, they have to leave the Republican Party. Impeachment is bipartisan. There is bipartisan support for impeachment. There is bipartisanship in Congress because of Justin Amash. There is bipartisanship in the country between a whole host of former Republican elected officials and never Trumper types. There is bipartisan support for impeachment in Kellyanne Conway's own household.
I was just reading a great piece in the New Yorker right before we started recording this. Bill Weld, former Republican governor of Massachusetts, also former Watergate lawyer, running against Trump now for the Republican nomination. And he's like, I literally couldn't conceive of a case that is more impeachable than this one. Having gone through Watergate and having been a Republican most of his life, he thinks I cannot conceive of one. There are plenty of conservatives, plenty of Republicans who believe that what Donald Trump did is impeachable. You don't have that on the other side. You don't.
To be very clear, in the 2020 Republican presidential primary, half the candidates believe Trump should be impeached. The other half is Trump.
I mean, now we should ask, is there risk for Biden in all of this? Because now we're talking not just about what Graham's going to do in the Senate, but what's going to happen in the Senate during a potential impeachment trial itself. And you can tell that one of the strategies that Trump and his Republican defenders are going to use is we're going to put Joe Biden and Hunter Biden on trial as opposed to Donald Trump. So, is there a risk, and what can Biden do about it?
When this whole process started, I thought I was pretty worried. If I had been on the Biden campaign, I would have been quite worried about how this, whether this would damage Biden's candidacy, whether it would affect, the perception of electability, of Biden's electability among Democratic primary voters. We've been talking about this nonstop for 2 months now, and there's no suggestion that has had any impact on the Democratic primary. So as the nominee, worry about everything. There was risks when you get out of bed in the morning, but it seems like Democratic primary voters, at least, they may choose not to vote for Biden for other reasons, but there's nothing that I've seen yet that suggests that Biden's being dragged into this impeachment issue has affected him or will affect him going forward in the primary. There's an open question about what impact it'll have among some number of general election voters, independents, Republicans who could potentially vote for a Democratic nominee, what impact it'll have with them. And I think, time will tell on that. But I think there should be real concern there, because this is basically rerunning the 2016 play of trying to make everyone seem at least almost as bad as Trump.
Yeah, I worry about it a lot for that reason. I mean, and the other reason I worry about it is I think that these things end up being cumulative over time, and you might not know right away. but 3 or 4 months you start losing some approval ratings. Over time, you start seeing your favorability ratings decline gradually, and suddenly Now look, Hillary Clinton at this stage in the race was more unpopular and had lower favorability ratings than any of the Democratic candidates do right now. So they had already done a number on her at this point. But that doesn't mean that anyone who watches Fox News, anyone who gets their information from the conservative ecosystem is going to hear that Biden is not just a bad Democratic candidate, but this, corrupt politician who probably did some crimes, right? Like that, they're going to hear that over and over and over again. And that's the whole Republican base. Not like Biden was going to get a bunch of Republican votes anyway, but, in a close election, everything matters. And I think if I was the Biden campaign, I would sort of mount an aggressive paid media campaign at some point that at least defends him against some of this stuff. But I don't know. They also don't have that much money, and they're running in a primary, so it's kind of hard to do now.
Yeah, there's definitely going to need to be some paid media pushback on this, and also there is both risk and opportunity here for his candidacy, because he is bet on electability, and one of the great pieces of evidence that he could theoretically be the most elected was the fact that the entire Trump administration was so scared of running against him that they engaged in a worldwide criminal conspiracy to stop him from being the nominee.
Yeah, that's rare.
Yeah.
So this brings us to what the Democrats in Congress should do next. While Schiff has not ruled out the possibility of more hearings, his Intelligence Committee is currently writing up a report that it will send to the House Judiciary Committee, which will then decide whether or not to draft articles of impeachment against the president. So that's what's happening right now. How concerned are you about the fact that we still have not gotten testimony from Bolton, Mulvaney, maybe even Parnas, if federal prosecutors are holding on to some of his evidence for trial? Obviously, the House committee has some video, photographic, audio evidence, whatever it may be, but even with Parnas, there might be a little delay here. What do you think about all this?
I have been an advocate for a while now of the most fulsome impeachment hearings possible, with as many witnesses as possible, touching on as many different elements of Trump's corruption and criminality as possible. But I'm starting to change my opinion on that, given how open and shut this case is and how everything has gone the right way for Democrats. Every witness even the ones the Republicans called, were devastating to Trump's case. The crime is proven 100 ways from Sunday.
Yeah.
And I just start to wonder whether there are diminishing returns. Like, if you told me you could get Mulvaney and Bolton in here the weekend after Thanksgiving, yes, definitely do that, right? If you could get Giuliani in here the weekend after Thanksgiving, even for a deposition, if not actual testimony in public, definitely do that. If you're going to be involved in a Supreme Court case for 6 months to get you an answer to that question, I just don't know that you'll be able to hold the nation's attention long enough to receive the sort of political communications payoff of the actual impeachment vote itself.
Yeah, I agree with that. And we've all had this debate with Brian Beutler, who believes something different, believes that they should. And look, what Brian would say is, I don't think you should wait 6 months for a court case, but I think you should at least try and set a deadline for yourself that if the courts don't decide by a certain date, then you just say, okay, we're going to go with what we have. And I get that, and I don't think there's harm in trying to subpoena Bolton. They already have a subpoena out to Mulvaney, who just basically has defied it. I don't think there's harm, but I also think if the Democrats set up the idea that they need these witnesses to complete their case, then if they don't get them, which is very possible, suddenly it seems like, oh, well, Democrats don't have it. And like you said, this is an open and shut case. We have it. We have the evidence. And I don't know. Now, I do think it's important because a lot of Republicans are saying, it's like the Will Hurd defense. Well, he did something I disagree with on foreign policy, but it's certainly not impeachable. And the way you counter that, one way you counter that is say, well, this is part of a pattern. And look at all the other things he's done, right? I mean, this goes to a question of not just more witnesses, but do you bring in other impeachable offenses? It's part of a pattern. The guy consistently is corrupt. He consistently tries to get personal favors using the powers of the presidency instead of using them for the public good over and over and over again. And you can list a whole bunch of episodes of this. So I do think the pattern of behavior is important, but this also assumes that we're trying to prove this like you'd prove it in court to a jury of Donald Trump's peers. And instead you have a fucking jury of loyalists, Trump loyalists. And so like if Republicans aren't going to believe the evidence that, Democrats have already laid out, if they're not going to believe the testimony of Trump administration officials themselves, they're not going to believe anything. They're not going to believe a audio recording where Donald Trump says, hey, I'm going to go bribe the Ukrainians to make sure we smear Joe Biden. They'd make up excuses for that. So what are we doing?
What would a jury of Donald Trump's peers be like? Who would those people be?
Yeah, I don't
Hulk
know.
Hogan?
It's a rough.
I just don't know.
It's like his fucking cabinet, I guess. And look, like there are, we are in this situation where he is abusing his power more and more all the time. We haven't even talked about, and I know Tommy's going to talk about it more on Pod Save the World this week, the fact that, Trump has basically ordered the defense secretary to allow a Navy SEAL who was accused and then convicted of at least one war crime to keep his status, interfered in military justice. And basically the Secretary of the Navy has been fired now because he wanted to run his own military justice to instill discipline in the ranks and make sure that someone who was guilty of taking a photo, posing next to a dead body, a SEAL, wanted to make sure that this guy faced zero punishment whatsoever, even though his fellow SEALs turned him in. And now we have the president deciding, you know what? If you are in the military and you commit a war crime, you can get off scot-free as long as you're loyal to me, as long as you go on right-wing radio and start saying that Donald Trump is great and the Democrats are criminals and all this kind of stuff. If you're a Trump guy, if you're loyal to me, you in the military can do anything and get away with it. That's where we are right now.
It's actually even worse than that, because this isn't it's not even like a perverted principle of Trump's. He is responding to the pleas and requests of Pete Hegseth, who is a Fox personality who is essentially Steve Ducey's understudy. This is his cause celeb. Is the host of Trump is doing a favor for the host of Fox and Friends Weekend.
It is horrible. It is horrible. Last question on all this. So we are heading towards the Judiciary Committee will receive a report from Schiff. They'll drop articles of impeachment. This vote will go to the whole House. The House will vote on impeachment. If the House, in fact, impeaches Donald Trump, it will go to the Senate. There will be a trial. John Roberts will preside over the trial. Various House members, Democratic House members, will present the case. They will be the prosecutors, and then Trump will have his defense. How are you feeling about the prospective trial? Like, what should Democrats be doing differently, if anything differently? How should their messaging evolve in this? I have this sense, just sort of reading the coverage this weekend and seeing where the Republicans are going, that they're headed towards, look, not only is Donald Trump innocent, but look at all these polls. Democrats, public opinion really hasn't moved that much. No one really cares. The Democrats have failed. No Republicans have decided in Congress to join them. And so what are we really doing? This is actually going to be a big victory for Donald Trump because the Democrats have failed at moving public opinion. How should Democrats handle this?
Well, I mean, that's been the concern from the beginning. It's one of the things that gave, I think, both of us pause about pursuing impeachment in the immediate aftermath of the Mueller report, is that the overwhelmingly most likely scenario is that the Senate, on a party line basis, will acquit Trump. And there's another question about how the media will handle that. How will that be, is that a victory for Trump? I mean, yes, in the sense that he's not being dragged out of office. It's a victory, but is it really? And so, there is real concern there. I think the thing for Democrats is to continue to frame throughout the whole process the larger, more important question. Is it okay for a president to use the power of their office in taxpayer-funded security assistance to try to rig an American election? If you think that is okay, vote to acquit. If you do not, then Donald Trump should be removed from office. Because, you have to frame the question and much like Schiff and all the Democrats in the House did a great job, is don't get pulled down into the bullshit. The Republican senators are, they're not going to be as absurd as, on a whole, as Jim Jordan and Nunes and a bunch of these other yahoos who are on the Intelligence Committee. But there are going to be people who are going to be performative assholes like Tom Cotton or Josh Hawley or a whole bunch of other people who are looking to shine their star in Trump's Republican Party, and you can't get dragged into that. The second thing is use this as an opportunity to put tremendous pressure on Cory Gardner, Susan Collins, Tom Tillis, Joni Ernst, Martha McSally, and the rest of the Republicans who Cory Gardner, either way, who are running in blue and purple states in 2020. If they are going to end up doing what is best, if they're going to put their party over the country, make them pay a political price for it in the moment and every day between now until the election.
Yeah, look, public opinion polls already show that about half the country believes the president should be impeached and removed from office. That is extraordinarily significant on its own. That is higher public approval for impeachment than in any president in the past except Nixon right before he resigned. That's where we are already. And now we are in an extremely polarized environment where I would be shocked if any Republican who gets their information from the conservative ecosystem, media ecosystem, believes that Donald Trump should be impeached. I would be shocked by that because that's not the information they're getting all the time. So I don't think we should expect public opinion to move all that much. It's the most polarized in history. But I do think this has always been about some of these Republican senators who are vulnerable in some of these swing states. And we need to make very clear that a vote to acquit Donald Trump is a vote to greenlight foreign interference in the 2020 election and is a vote to greenlight the idea that the president can use the power of his office to destroy anyone who challenges his power. That's what this is about. And I do think that the Democrats should make those points over and over again. It's about rigging an election, and it's about the president using the power of his office to destroy anyone who challenges him. That's what he's doing right now. And if he gets away with this, if they think that's okay, then what we're saying in this country is when you get into office and you have some power and you have some control and influence over federal dollars, federal agencies, people who are working for the government, law enforcement, the CIA, anything, you can use that to destroy the career of anyone who challenges you, even if it's a conspiracy. And we're saying that's okay in America now. And you know what? If the Republicans say that's okay, then I'm not going to regret conducting this impeachment trial for a second. I will not regret it for a second. I don't even care if it's that unpopular right now. This is about the sanctity of our elections and our democracy, and there is nothing more important than that.
That was great. You should be a senator.
It's just, over the weekend I was just reading all this stuff, and it's it is pretty depressing and a little bit scary that we are sort of careening towards this, because I do think, look, if he is acquitted, which of course he probably will be when you see all these Republicans talking, and as we've talked about, if he is, it's going to be bad, but we still have a chance to get rid of him in 2020. But it sort of makes the 2020 election, as if it wasn't already the most important election ever, even more critical, because if this man who we know committed these crimes is exonerated and then wins, and David Plouffe has been saying this, imagine what he will do when he never has to face voters again in a second term. He has 4 years never having to face accountability or voters again. It's pretty scary, and it should scare everyone into, getting off their asses and working their hearts out for whoever we nominate as the Democratic nominee. All right, let's talk about 2020. Speaking of that, over the weekend, New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg officially announced his candidacy for president with a video and a very expensive ad campaign. Just this week, he's spending over $30 million in 100 media markets across 24 mostly Super Tuesday states. To put this in context, the current biggest spender in the Democratic primary, billionaire Tom Steyer, is spending $1.2 million on television ads, and every other candidate is spending $500,000 or less. That's $500,000 versus $30 million in a week. In his announcement, Bloomberg argues he's the right person to take on Trump, and I believe we have a quick clip from his announcement ad.
There's an America waiting to be rebuilt, where everyone without health insurance is guaranteed to get it, and everyone who likes theirs can go ahead and keep it. Where the wealthy will pay more in taxes, and the struggling middle class will get their fair share. And jobs that just allow you to get by will become jobs that let you get ahead. Mike Bloomberg for president, jobs creator, leader, problem solver. It's going to take all three.
Dan, what do you think about the video?
I mean, as announcement videos go, it was good. I mean, it distills his case, right?
Yeah.
And it takes his bio and applies it in the way that is most friendly to a Democratic primary audience, while without. Let me try that again. I thought the video was good in the sense that it takes his biography and distills it in a pretty authentic way to a set of issues that would be of most interest to a Democratic primary electorate, which is not an easy feat considering he was a Republican like 3 years ago. He was a Republican. I guess it's actually longer than that. I think he switched in his last term from Republican to Independent at some point, but he was the Republican mayor of New York City, billionaire owner of a media company, and is now running the Democratic primary. And so, that's a marketing challenge, to say the least.
Yeah, and look, you can tell who their audience is for this ad. It is not Democratic primary activists. It is not progressives. It is people who are moderate and progressive leaning, who think, I've heard of Bloomberg. I heard he was a successful mayor, rich guy, owns a business, and look, I guess he did stuff on climate, which he did, on gun control, which he did. And I like that. And, he's rich, but he says in this ad, he's going to raise taxes and, he's going to give an option. He took an indirect swipe at Medicare for All, but said, he's for a public option in the video. And so that's the kind of audience. And these people are probably less engaged in politics. The question is, how many of them are there, right? And the other big bet he's making here as part of a strategy is, again, these ads are running in Super Tuesday states. He's skipping the first 4 primary states. He's skipping the debates because he's not taking contributions. And to get into the debates, you have to have a certain number of donors. So because he's not doing that, he's going to skip the debates. And he's betting, will these very sleek, well-produced ads be enough for all these people in Super Tuesday states to suddenly say, yeah, I like this guy and I'm going to take a chance on them, even if I don't really know him that much and I haven't seen him in the debates?
I think it is a long shot for Bloomberg for the reasons we suggested. He's getting in it late. He is a former Republican who has some real challenges with the African-American community based on the law enforcement policies that were in place when he was the mayor of New York, real challenges. But if there were a path, this is the path. It is, don't get sucked in the early states. Wait it out, let it sort itself out. And if for some reason Biden were to falter in those early states and maybe only Sanders and Warren make it out, and you've set yourself up for the potential to be the moderate alternative, not electable, the moderate alternative to this other group, and to sort of bring in what remained of the Biden coalition or what remained of the Buttigieg coalition. The thing is, this is a path only available to a billionaire.
Yeah.
I guess his advertising campaign is $34 million, which I think is I saw something that was the equivalent of writing a $300 check for the average American.
Yeah. And
to give you a sense of scale, this is from Shane Goldmacher, a New York Times reporter, that if you watched the 5 p.m. newscast all week on NBC in your hometown of Los Angeles, you would see 20 60-second Bloomberg ads. That is an ungodly sum of money. He is running more ads in each of these markets all around the country than I think almost any Democrat is running in the Des Moines market, in the most important state or at least the first state in the Democratic primary. It is an ungodly sum of money.
And
Will it work?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. And
it's a long road.
That's the big question: is does this work? I mean, we have seen that Tom Steyer's significant ad spend did get him onto the debate stage. It did get him past the threshold in polling, and suddenly you saw him pop up in a couple polls in the early states at like 3, 4, 5, 6% higher when he started than he is now. And the thing that Michael Bloomberg has going for him over Tom Steyer is he's much richer. He's a much richer billionaire than Tom Steyer, and he's got higher name ID than Tom Steyer. Now, that said, 538 wrote a piece about Bloomberg's path and said his average favorability rating is 37% approve, 31% disapprove, so not great.
The thing I'd say about all of this, though, is Bloomberg does not – he is surrounded by some really smart, very data-oriented political operatives. Like, they definitely see a path. I think they are probably clear-eyed about the narrowness of that path, but they see one, and they wouldn't have done this without believing that there was an investment, that investment here could pay off. This is not I'm not saying Bloomberg does not have a large ego. Everyone in politics, particularly billionaires in politics, have a large ego, but he has walked away from the possibility of running many times before because he didn't think he could win, and he made a different decision this time, and that suggests that something in their data shows a path, and as we should at least think about that. I think the New York-based media complex tends to overrate his chances, but we shouldn't underrate them either.
Yeah, and look, you can buy ads, but you can't buy enthusiasm, and that's basically their bet right now. That that you don't really need a lot of enthusiasm or grassroots support to win the nomination and the presidency. And that you can just sort of message to the moderate part of the electorate and then maybe the more disengaged part of the electorate, and that's going to be enough. And, it's quite a bet to make because I don't think clearly enthusiasm alone is not enough to make you president of the United States. But if you look at the people who have won the nomination and the presidency, all of them have some sort of fan base. And we have yet to see the Bloomberg fan base materialize. But perhaps we will. How do you think his candidacy could change the race for any other candidate?
I mean, I think that's really – I've been trying to think about this in the context of, just all the candidates fighting for, some lane to get to 15% enough for delegates or whatever. And I think the real thing is we do not know the answer to that until after probably South Carolina. It's a wholly different thing based on which candidates are out there. I think the most likely scenario is it affects no one. Yeah. Right? He spends all this money, stays in the low single digits. That support is dispersed among 2 or 3 candidates. But, if it's, let's say it's a 2-person race coming out of the early states between Biden and Warren or Biden and Sanders, whatever else, and then Bloomberg's getting 4%, that 4% could be decisive because that's probably mostly coming from Biden. If it's 3 candidates, less so. We really need to know who makes it out of the early states with any chance of accumulating delegates going forward to know whether Bloomberg gets there. But it's like the path you have to see to really be specific about it is Bloomberg's got to go from where he is now to above 15% almost everywhere. Yeah. And that's hard. That's a hard thing to do even with all those millions and billions.
I think right now he's serving as a arguably effective punching bag for Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren because he's making their case for them that billionaires shouldn't buy democracy, and so they're out there whacking him, and I'm sure that's helping them. I'm sure he may be making a Mayor Pete and a Joe Biden a little bit nervous since he's trying to get into their lane, or an Amy Klobuchar. But like you said, I think you're right. Like let's give the ad campaign a couple weeks and let's see what happens in these early primaries because it's really just hard to predict this stuff now, which is why we don't do it. Okay, when we come back, we will have Dan's interview with Acronym's Tara McGowan.